A reading of A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. We begin. For the last 20 years at Syracuse University, I've been teaching a class in the 19th century Russian short story translation. My students are some of the best writers in America. We pick 6 students a year from an applicant pool between 600 and 700. They arrive already wonderful. What we try to do over the next 3 years is to help them achieve what I call their iconic space, the place in which they will write stories only they could write, using what makes them uniquely themselves, their strengths, weaknesses, obsessions, peculiarities, the whole deal. At this level, good writing is assumed. The goal is to help them acquire the technical means to become defiantly and joyfully themselves. In the Russian class, hoping to understand the physics of the form, how does this thing work anyway, we turn to a handful of the great Russian writers to see how they did it. I sometimes joke, and yet not, that we are reading to see what we can steal. A few years back, after class, chalk dust hovering in the immunal air, old-fashioned radiator clanking in the corner, marching band practicing somewhere in the distance, let's say, I had the realization that some of the best moments of my life, the moments during which I really felt myself offering something of value to the world, have been spent teaching that Russian class. The stories I teach in it are constantly with me at work, the high bar against which I measure my own. I want my stories to move and change someone as these Russian stories have moved and changed me. After all these years, the text feels like old friends I got to introduce to a new group of brilliant young writers every time I teach the class. So I've decided to write a book and put some of what my students and I have discovered together over the years down on paper, and in that way offer a modest version of that class to you. Over the actual semester, we might read 30 stories, 2 or 3 per class, but the purposes of this book will limit ourselves to 7. The stories I've chosen, which aren't meant to represent a diverse class of Russian writers, just Sukhov, Turgenev, Tolstoy, and Gogol, or even necessarily the best stories by these writers. They're just 7 stories I love and found inanimally teachable over the years. If my goal was to get a non-reader to fall in love with short story, these are among the stories I would offer her. They're great stories in my opinion, written during the high water period for their form, but they're not all equally great. Some are great in spite of their certain flaws. Some are great because of their flaws. Some of them may require me to do a little convincing, in which I'm happy to attempt. What I really want to talk about is the short story form itself. And these are good stories for that purpose. Simple, clear, elemental. For a young writer, reading the Russian stories of this period is akin to a young composer studying Bach. All of the bedrock principles of the form are on display. The stories are simple but moving. We care about what happens in them. They are written to challenge, annotize, and outrage, and in a complicated way to console. Once we begin reading the stories, which are for the most part, quite domestic and apolitical. This idea may strike you as strange, but this is a resistance literature written by progressive reformers in a repressive culture under constant threat of censorship, in a time when writers' politics could lead to an exile, imprisonment, and execution. The most radical idea of all that the resistance in the stories is quiet at a slant and comes from perhaps the most radical idea of all, that every human is worthy of attention, and that the origins of every good and evil capability of the universe may be found by observing a single and even humble person and the turnings of his or her mind. I was an engineering student in college at Colorado School of Mines and came into fiction late, and with particular understanding of fiction's purpose. I had a powerful experience one summer reading The Grapes of Wrath at night in an old RV in my parents' driveway in Colorado. After long days of working in the field as what was called a jug hustler, my fellow workers included a Vietnam vet who, there in the middle of periodically burst into the voice of an amped-up radio host. "This is Vormero," and an ex-con just out of jail who every morning in the van on their way to the ranch where we were working would update me on the new and perverse things he and his lady had tried sexually the night before. The images that have stayed with me ever since, sadly. I've read Steenbeck. After each day the novel came alive. I was working in a continuation of the fictional world I saw. It was the same America. Decades later, I was tired. Tom Joad was tired. I felt misused by some large wealthy force, and so did Riverland Case. The capitalist was crushing me and my new pals beneath it, just as it crushed the Okies who'd driven through the same panhandle in the 1900s on their way to California. We were too malformed, deleterious of capitalism, the necessary cost of doing business. In short, Steenbeck was writing about life as I was finding it. He arrived at the same questions I was arriving at. He felt they were very urgent, as they were coming to feel urgent to me. The Russians, when I found them years later, worked on me in the same way. They seemed to regard fiction as not something decorative, but as a vital, moral, ethical tool. They changed you when you read them, made the world seem to be telling a different, more interesting story, a story in which you might play a meaningful part, in which you had responsibilities. We live, as you may have noticed, in a degraded era, bombarded by facile, shallow, agenda-laced, too rapidly disseminated information bursts. We're about to spend time in a realm where it is assumed that, as the great 20th century Russian short story master Isaac Babel put it, no iron stick can pierce a human heart as easily as the period in the right place. We're going to enter a 7 fastidious constructed scale models of the world made for specific purpose that our time maybe doesn't fully endorse, but these writers accepted implicitly as aim of art, namely to ask the big questions. How are we supposed to be living down here? What are we put here to accomplish? What should we value? What is the truth anyway, and how might we recognize it? How can we feel any peace when some people have everything and others have nothing? How are we supposed to live with joy in a world that seems to want us to love other people, but then roughly separate us from them in the end, no matter what? You know, those cheerful Russian kind of big questions. For a story to ask these sort of questions, we first have to finish it. It has to draw us in, compel us to keep going. So the aim of this book is mainly diagnostic. If a story drew us in, kept us reading, made us feel respected, how did it do that? I'm not a critic or a literary historian or an expert on Russian literature or any of that. The focus of my artistic life has been trying to learn to write emotionally moving stories that a reader feels compelled to finish. I consider myself more Vaudevillian than scholar. My approach to teaching is less academic. Restruction in this context is a metaphor for political revolution on the ongoing concern in the Russian zeitgeist and more strategic. Why do we even need that second return to the village? The basic drill I'm proposing here is read the story, then turn your mind to the experience you just had. Was there a place you found particularly moving? Something you resisted or that confused you? A moment when you saw yourself tearing up, getting annoyed, thinking anew? Any lingering questions about the story? Any answer is acceptable. If you, my good-hearted trooper of a reader, felt it's valid. If it confounded you, that's worth mentioning. If you were bored or even pissed off, valuable information. No need to dress up your response in a literary language to express it in terms of theme or plot or character development or any of that. The stories were, of course, written in Russian. I offer the English translations that I've responded to the most strongly, or in some cases, the versions I found years ago and I've been teaching since. I don't read or speak Russian, so I can't vouch for their faithfulness to the originals, though we'll do some thinking about it as we go. I propose that we approach the stories as they were originally written in English, hoping that we're losing the music of the Russian and the nuance they would have for Russian readers. Even in English, scorn of those delights have words to teach us. The main thing I want us to be asking is, what did we feel and where did we feel it? All the coherent, intellectual work begins with a genuine reaction. Once you've read each story, I'll provide my thoughts in an essay in which I'll walk you through my reactions, make a case for the story, offer some technical explanations of why we might have felt what we felt, where we felt it. I should say here, I expect a given essay won't mean much to you. I haven't read the correspondence, but if you haven't read the I should say that I expect given essay won't mean much to you if you haven't read the corresponding story. I've tried to pitch the essays to someone who has just finished reading as a reaction, fresh in her mind. This is a kind of new writing for me, and more technical than usual. I hope the essays are entertaining, of course, but as I was writing, the term workbook kept coming into my mind. A book that will work. Sometimes hard work, but work that we'll be doing together. And with the intention of urging ourselves deeper into these stories than a simple first read would allow. The idea is that working closely with stories will make them more available to us as we work on our own. This intense and might say forced acquaintance with them will inform the swervers and instinctive moves that are so much a part of what writing actually is, from moment to moment. So this is a book for writers, but also, I hope, for readers. Over the last 10 years, I had a chance to give readings, talks all over the world, and meet thousands of dedicated readers. Their passion for literature, evident in their questions from the floor, our talks at the singing table, and the conversations I've had at book clubs, has convinced me that there are vast underground networks for goodness at work in the world. A web of people who put reading at the center of their lives because they know from experience that reading makes them more expansive, generous people that make their lives more interesting. As I wrote this book, I had those people in mind, their generosity with my work and their curiosity about literature. Their faith in it made me feel I could swing for the fences a little here, be as technical, nerdy, and frank as needed. We need to try to explore the way the creative process really works. To study the way we read is to study the way the mind works, the way it evaluates a statement for truth, the way it behaves in relation to another's mind, i.e. the readers, across time and space. What we're going to be doing here, essentially watching ourselves read, trying to reconstruct how we felt as we were just now reading, why we would want to do this. Well, a part of the mind that reads a story is also the part that reads the world. It can deceive us, but it can also be trained to accuracy. It can fall into disuse and make us more susceptible to lazy, violent, materialistic forces, but it can also urge us back to life, transforming us into a more active, curious, active readers of reality. Throughout, I will be offering some models for thinking about stories. No one of these is correct or sufficient. Think of them as rhetorical trial balloons. What if we think about a story this way? Is that useful? If the model appeals to you, use it. If not, discard it. In Buddhism, it said that teaching is like a finger pointing at the moon. The moon, enlightenment, is the essential thing, and pointing a finger is trying to direct us to it. But the important thing is to not confuse the finger for the moon. For those of us who are writers, who dream of someday writing a story like the ones we've loved, to which we've disappeared pleasurably and briefly, seem more real to us than the so-called reality of the goal, the moon, is to attain the state of mind in which we might write such a story. All of the workshop talk and short and story theory and caustic, clever, craft-engaging slogans are just finger-pointing at the moon, trying to lead us to that state of mind. The coercion, the creation, which we accept or reject the giving finger. Is it helping? I offer what follows in that spirit. That's the end of We Begin.